Hi there. This is Brother Merrill's Inspirational Stories. I hope you enjoyed conference as much as I did. I was thrilled to hear President Nelson talk to us about the Kirkland Temple and about temples in our lives and what an enormous part of our life they can be. President Nelson explained how the Kirkland Temple had been purchased with other Nauvoo properties and antiquities, but he took time to explain the significance of the Kirkland Temple, that Jesus Christ himself appeared and accepted the temple, and said that several events that took place there had been prophesied for millennia. When Christ appeared, he said, "I will manifest myself to my people in this temple." And then President Nelson explained that this significant promise applies to every dedicated temple today. And I invite you to ponder what the Lord's promise means to you personally. I've worked as a Provo ordinance worker for the last 27 years in the old Provo Temple at the mouth of Rock Canyon. When people come to the temple for the first time, they usually have a friend or a loved one or even a mission companion that accompanies them. That helps them feel more comfortable as they receive the ordinances of the temple for the first time for themselves. Years ago, I worked as the initiatory coordinator, and my assistant was a dear friend, David Holcomb. We had dinner one Tuesday evening. The next day he went to work and experienced severe dizziness, and he went to the doctor and they discovered he had a tumor in his brain stem. They did exploratory surgery. When David returned to work at the temple, he had to use a walker. His health declined rapidly and he passed away. We had some long talks about mortality and his impending view of eternity. And he used to tell me, Lance, when people come from the other side, they need to have an escort, just like we escort them here on this side of the veil. And that's what I'm going to be doing. He has been an escort as he has brought other spirits with him and introduced them to the temple ordinances. The majority of the work we do in the temple is accepted. I've had many, many experiences. I'd like to share a couple of them. Just a few months ago, a good friend, Doug Orton, came as a patron. His wife has done extensive genealogical research, and they have a lot of names to do. Before we perform these ordinances, however, for men, we have to give that individual the Melchizedek priesthood. So my friend Doug Orton had come in that day with some of his names. I was in the washing area. I laid my hands on his head and began the washing ordinance and looked at the name. And it was a Jewish man from 800 A.D. And he had two separate titles with numbers. One was Ben David 27, and I don't remember the other title. And we puzzled over him because it was little tiny writing, two full lines of names and titles. And as I conferred the priesthood upon Doug as proxy for this man, I felt this good brother's joy in receiving the Melchizedek priesthood. In the next compartment was a well-known scholar and theologian, Paul Hoskinson. He speaks Hebrew, so when he came in to seal the washing, Doug asked him, "What is all this?" And he showed him all these titles, and he said, "Well, in Hebrew, this means," and he explained to us that this was a very important leader in the Jewish community. He said, "I wonder how he feels about getting the Melchizedek priesthood." And I said, he was thrilled. I could feel his joy as I performed that ordinance. He felt like, finally, of the Melchizedek priesthood. Another story I'd like to tell that demonstrates how we can feel these individuals as we do their ordinance work. I was doing a family file name for Shirley Steinagel. I did the endowment for that brother, and as I did, I had very specific insights to his personality. And when I gave the card back to Shirley, I said, this guy was real mechanical, and he had a thought process that was very mechanical and methodical. And she goes, he was an engineer, Lance. How did you know that? I was able to discern this good brother's spirit and sense the things that he was thinking as I acted as proxy for him, and he received his endowment. These people accept the work we're doing. The majority of them accept the work we're doing. I'd like to tell several more stories that have happened in our temple. I say our temple, in the Provo temple. There was a young lady that came to the baptistry. Before COVID, sometimes people would come in with a whole stack of family names. If the baptistry was not busy, we would accommodate them. And sometimes people would do scores of baptisms for their family file names. And that was the situation with this young lady, and she was down in the font for quite some time. And the recorder is up above the font, and he puts the name on the scanner so that the person in the font can perform the baptism and have the correct name, and then they check it off and set it aside, slide another name in there, and he said, "Thank you, sister, that's all of them." And she got quite urgent. She said, "No, it's not." And he goes, "No, that's all of them. Look, they're all done." And he held up this big stack of family file names. And she goes, "No, there's one more." And so this old guy, he started thumbing through. And sure enough, hidden in this stack, they had missed one name. Two cards had stuck together. So they performed that ordinance. And then as the young lady came out of the font, the recorder said, "How did you know?" And she said, "Well, when I came up out of the water the first time, I looked over and there was a huge group of people standing behind the witnesses. And one of them smiled and left. And each time I came out of the water, that's what I would see, this group of people, and one of them would smile and then leave. And I knew that that was the sister that I had just done the baptism for. And when you said there were no names left, I knew there was a name left because there was still a person standing there, and she looked quite worried that we were going to skip her. So I knew the work was not finished. The people we do the work for are there. Some of the tender experiences we have had in the temple don't involve the individuals from the other side as much as just the Lord's blessing our lives and giving us insight, giving us personal revelation, revealing to us the things that we need to know in our life to become closer to Him. There was one young teenage girl that came to the baptistry, and she was blind. She'd been blind her whole life. She was in her middle teens. I've had several daughters, and I know how long they can spend in front of a mirror. And so I can really understand how this young girl must have felt, because everyone told her she was beautiful. Everyone described her hair and her facial features, but she'd never seen herself. And she longed to know really what she looked like. And she came to the Provo Baptistry and was doing baptisms for the dead. And as she came out of the water and up the stairs, she just happened to turn, and for just a moment, she saw her reflection in the mirrors next to the font. It was a tender mercy from her Heavenly Father for that young teenage girl. Some people have been given the gift of being able to see spiritual beings. I've known several people that have that gift in my life. Many of them have been special people that have challenges that most of us will never understand. And some people just have that gift. Others are able to discern spirits. And I'd like to tell a story about one of the good sisters in our temple. A family was coming to be sealed. The parents came. They'd been inactive for quite some time, and they were receiving their own endowments, and then after their endowments, they were going to be sealed to their children. When that takes place, the children are brought with the parents, and some of the sisters take care of them until the time that they're needed in the sealing office. That good sister was tasked that day with bringing the children from the children's room up to the sealing office and taking them down to the room where their parents had just been sealed. She escorted them into the room and then waited out in the hall. And this little family was all sealed together. And the sister waited to take the children back down to the children's room. All the guests came out, and then the parents and the children came out, and the sister looked into the room. She goes, "Where's that other little boy? There's another little boy." And the mother said, No, we just have 3 children. She goes, "No, I brought up 4 children in the elevator." And the mother started to cry, and she said, "The reason we became active in the church is our oldest boy died last year. And we came to the temple so that our family could be sealed together." Sometimes people are blessed in the temple to see those that we're doing the work for. I think most of the people we do the work for are very anxious to get the work done. I had a dear friend who died in a hang gliding accident, and I have a video that I talk about how he came to see me, and we had a very specific and distinct conversation before the Life Flight helicopter even got to his body. And his expanse of eternity and the view that he was given of truth was instantaneous. He knew things and accepted things that he never would believe while he was on earth. A year after Joe's death, I was working at the temple at the time, and he started to drive me crazy to do his temple work. So I thought, well, that'd be great. I'd love to do Joe's temple work. So I wanted to get permission from his wife, and I called Chris, and I said, "I'd like to do Joe's temple work." And she goes, "Well, it's been done." I thought, well, that's odd, because he's really been bugging me to do his temple work. She goes, "No, it's done." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I hung up, and I thought, well, she's not active in the church. Maybe she's just not sure what I'm talking about. So I called Joe's mom. She goes, "No, it's been done." And I hung up, and I thought, that's odd, because Joe's driving me crazy, and he just wouldn't leave me alone. At night, in the morning, when I was driving the truck around, when I was working, I just felt him all the time, and he wanted his temple work done. So about a week later, I called Chris and his mom back, and they again said, "No, his temple work's done." And that was back before we had all the computerized family search wonderful things that we have now. We had to go down to the steakhouse, and we had to bring up on their computer the information, and then we had to print a floppy disk and take it to the temple and have them print the name cards. And I went with Jack Steinagel down to our steakhouse, and he looked it up for me. And sure enough, his temple work was not done. So Jack was great, and he printed the floppy disk and gave it to me. He said, "This is temple ready. Just give this to the people in the temple, and they'll be able to print the name for you." And I was working on Friday. The first endowment room started at 6 o'clock, so our prayer meeting was at 5:20. And then after that room started, there were quite a few of the workers who didn't have that much to do, because we had to wait for an hour and a half until that veil came off. So I was down in the laundry helping fold socks. And Joe just about booted me out of the laundry room. He goes, why are you down here doing laundry when you could be up doing my initiatory ordinances? And so I went up and I did his initiatory ordinances. And then I stayed late that day and did his endowment. After that, I haven't heard from Joe again. It's been decades. But I know he was very, very serious about getting his work done. The moment it could be done, he wanted it done. I have one more story. It's a very personal story. In 2006, we lost our little girl, Janie. I won't get into the details, but 1 year later, we had moved, and I was remodeling the home we had previously lived in. The Edgemont Fourth Ward is a very large ward, one of the biggest in the church. And once a month, our ward had temple night. And since I was an ordinance worker, I was privileged to officiate during those ward temple nights. But after we moved from the ward, I didn't do that anymore. We made arrangements to do Jannie's temple work, my daughter, 1 year after she died. And several of her friends and many of our family members wanted to be there with us when Jannie's temple work was done. Sherry would act as proxy, and I had made arrangements so that I could officiate in that endowment room. It's hard when you lose a 19-year-old daughter. And my wife had fasted and prayed that she would be able to see our daughter, just to know she was okay. She wanted to see her. You worry when your child goes to the other side. As I drove down the hill from our home that I was remodeling towards the home we were living in Grandview, I saw a couple out walking, the Mayfields. They were fun. We teased each other a lot. And I said, "What are you out walking with that old man, Sister Mayfield?" And she goes, "Oh, Lance, are you going to officiate? It's Ward Temple night tonight." And I said, "I can't. I've made arrangements. We're going to do Jannie's temple work tonight. We have 30 or 40 people coming to be in the room with us when we do that." And she goes, "Oh, that's too bad." And they have a daughter, a wonderful girl named Jan, and she's a special person. She goes, "Jan will be so disappointed. She loves it when you officiate." And all the way home, it was like, you got to change. You got to call everybody. So when I got home, I told Sherry that Sister Mayfield wanted me to officiate for Ward Temple night that night, and we'd have to change the time. And I told her, I don't want to, but I feel like we should. When I told her, she goes, "Well, let's do it. It wouldn't be that much trouble. We'd have to call maybe a dozen people, but we could do that." So I made the arrangements. We got to the temple, and everyone came a little later. The ward filled the room, all these familiar faces. It was a very nice experience. When we finished the session, and everyone went into the celestial room, I went around and I came into the celestial room. And dear little Jan Mayfield ran up to me and said, "Did you see her? Did you see her? She was right there. She was standing right behind you. She kept putting both hands on Sherry's shoulders. Did you see her?" And I knew then why the Lord had orchestrated that I would officiate for the Edgemont Fourth Ward that night. Because Jan Mayfield had that gift. She could see spirits. And even though my wife and I both felt the presence of our daughter, it was wonderful to have it confirmed to us and have someone see her there with us. My daughter Jannie was quite spirited. I'd been working at the temple about 10 years at that point, and I was sitting up in the front of the room, and just as clear as day in my mind, Jannie said, "You think you know everything about the temple, Dad. I'll bet you didn't know this." And then she taught me something about the temple clothing. that I'd never thought of. I'd never heard anybody talk about anything like it before, and yet it seemed quite obvious. President Merrill Bateman was our temple president then, and I went up to him after the meeting and I told him what she had taught me. He thought for a minute and he goes, "That's true. I never thought of it, but that's true." The majority of the people that we do temple work for are there. When you're performing ordinances as a proxy, try to tune out all the thoughts and get to know these people, because you are blessing their life into eternity, but they will also assist and bless your life. I know that the people we do temple work for accept that work. And possibly Dave Holcomb is acting as their escort. I know Heavenly Father's authority has been restored in these latter days to perform these saving ordinances and to gather Israel. Most of the gathering will take place on the other side of the veil. Billions of ordinances will be performed. It's a wonderful work to be part of. I was so glad to hear President Nelson talk about it this last weekend. This has been Brother Merrill's Inspirational Stories. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please subscribe. You might enjoy this story. You can also watch all of Brother Merrill's Inspirational Stories at this link. Thanks again.